series of sessions that the guys at upGrad and LBB put together to really focus on what the future really holds and kind of bring together some of the brightest minds in the business space, bring them into this conversation so you guys can watch them and really ask them about what they think the future holds in different spaces in the business world, as well as also kind of give all of us a few tips on what we need to upskill towards for the future. We've had a few very interesting sessions so far, but today's one is actually going to be quite cool. Today we're going to be talking about the evolution of the consumer, as well as really focus on the e-commerce and commerce aspect of things in that sense of the word. And we have a fabulous set of guests. So today's session is with none other than Suchita Salwan, the CEO and co-founder of LBB, who's here to share her insights on building LBB as a curated marketplace for customers who, like us, are constantly looking for something different, working over, having over 22 million folks discovering and shopping over 100,000 unique and special brands found on LBB. And with her, we have Prashant Jain, the CMO of HP India, who's leading digital marketing transformation for HP across the consumer and commercial businesses. And he's going to share his thoughts on how he's seen the consumers of India Inc. change over the course of the past few years. So yeah, glad to have both of you. Thank you for joining us, guys.
Thanks a lot for having us, man.
Thanks, Varun. Pleasure's all ours. Yeah.
And I can see one of us is in Kabini, whereas others are at home. But I want to kind of start off by actually asking both of you, and I won't do this too often. I won't do this. Okay, one question to both of you. So we do that round robin of sorts. But I thought I will start off by saying, what for you has really changed about the consumer over the last, I'd say, year and a couple of years? Prashant, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. See, if you, and maybe let me talk about two things, right? One is like the consumer as we know him, and then obviously we are more interested often in the shopper, right? More than the consumer as a business manager. Yeah. So, see, I think if you look at the past couple of years, and I'm obviously talking about the context around us, the categories which you indulge in has significantly changed, right? So, say your wallet share, as we used to call it, has probably gone through quite a transformation. You see significant investments happening in home improvement because you're spending a lot more time at home. A lot of indulgences like travel or even eating out have kind of lost their meaning. And therefore, we are seeing so closer home in the category of notebooks and say in devices, we are definitely seeing an upgradation. A lot of people are refreshing. They are refreshing faster than they used to. And they are definitely investing a lot more in experiences, which they get out of devices. Now talking about the shopper, see, I think, and that's where probably the bigger shift and a more probably permanent shift has happened, right? If you look at overall shopping journeys, digital shopping journeys have actually become shorter, right? See, we were seeing an explosion of content. It probably continues to happen, but we are now seeing people probably come to decisions faster. They know where to look for the content they want. They are probably, closing, for example, if you look at notebooks, our typical shopper journey used to be 15 to 20 days. It's come down to 8 to 12 days, right? So, and that's, those are the kind of shifts I'm sure Suchita is also seeing that, yeah.
I think at our end, obviously there are certain trends that have been accelerated over the past 2 years specifically, given folks who spend the past year sitting at home. I think the three large trends that, we've been able to tap into and also leverage to our own advantage. The first one has been growth of micro brands. And to the point that Prashant made as well, right? There's just been this like explosion of choice for customers, which has been caused by two things. One is more and more brands are coming online through platforms like LBB or various others. And the second thing is also new brands are coming up, right? So we spoke about the direct to consumer space and just the plethora of brands that are launching within that category. So there's a lot of money going into investing in consumer brands. There are a lot of offline businesses that are now coming online, and that just led to this explosion of micro brands as such. And the customer impact that we've seen is this, what we call ensemble. The idea of ensemble has really seeped into the customer's life, right? So, for example, if you earlier walked into our customer's washroom, for example, you'd see Palmolive, J&J, P&G, HUL, the same sort of mega brands that exist within the FMCG space. But now what's very interesting is when we guys do consumer calls and consumer research, and we ask our customer, hey, tell us what products you use. She'll of course have few big Palmolive shower gel or toothpaste or whatever else, but the 50-60% of the brands are brands that even I haven't heard of. Given that we've got 60,000 brands on LBB, even I won't know head or tail of what those brands are. So I think one is just this explosion leading to an age of ensemble, and customer loyalty has also therefore deteriorated. I don't think it's a bad thing, but that's happened. And I think the second large movement, which we internally at LBB call accelerated signaling, and I'll get into that in just a bit. But really, where that's come from is it's super interesting. One of our someone who I speak with fairly often, Irina Vittal, she had given this really interesting example to a bunch of us, saying that when Future and Big Bazaar used to plan their sales calendars, they would consult with a pundit and ask him or her for a lineup of all the events, and basically plan their sales according to when these like tiny events will happen. And then of course there's the Karwa Chauths and Diwalis of the world. You talk to a millennial today, she is not waiting for Diwali to buy a cool new outfit. She's not waiting to get married to buy cool shit for her home. And I think this phenomena is what we at LBB call accelerated signaling, where because of this explosion of micro brands, because the occasions for shopping have changed, a large part of it being caused just by influencers, availability of content, to the point that Prashant made, right? You have dopamine on every app, on every possible device. The customers just started to accelerate the pace at which they signal. So they're no longer waiting to buy a fancy car, home, or watch to show their idea of what their life is. They're accumulating these smaller goods. Like the fast fashionness is kind of percolating into pretty much every consumption category. And those are the two large ways in which we've at least seen customer shifts happen.
Would it then be almost a good way to categorize it? There are some brands which have gone towards a shift where there are not just digital first in the way they exist for the consumer, but they're digital first in the way they market to their consumer, where you would traditionally have anyone in the marketing space, etc., focusing on sale as well, really saying, okay, it's going to be retail first in terms of physical, and then commerce, e-commerce coming secondary. Are we almost seeing a shift, saying, okay, we almost can categorize an entire, like break them into two parts. One part where you put physical first and the digital comes secondary, and the other one flips around. And it doesn't only have to be for smaller brands, can be for across the board as well.
So, sorry, Prashant, jump in.
Go ahead, please. For you.
So actually, I think the small point that I'll add over there is, I think, and obviously Prashant can talk more about this because I think HP has done a phenomenal job. But I think what a lot of folks have realized is that commerce is not a point in time, right? Commerce is a journey. So sure, maybe, to Prashant's point, the sort of gestation period from inspiration to purchase has come down. But, there still have to exist multiple points of inspiration in order to, convert the customer over a period of time. So just a small thing that I'll add over there is, commerce is not a point in time. In fact, now more than ever, it's important to look at commerce as a journey instead of, if I do X and if I'm available at Y offline store, my products will move. Because even for a lot of large brands that we work with, we don't see that old school formula really driving results as it did anymore. Prashant, all yours.
No, absolutely. Just to give you like a sense of how much has changed and how much hasn't, right? So the more we change, the more we remain the same. And if you look at near me searches, right, you would expect, why would somebody search laptop store near me? if you are in a lockdown, right? People shouldn't, but they are. So we continue to see similar number of laptop near me searches, laptop store near me searches, right? Because there are people who are still looking for physical experiences. They are looking for trust. They are looking for the warm body to talk to, right? And therefore, for us, actually, offline, remains a very critical part of product discovery. So this would be really counterintuitive, but we continue to expand HP World stores, right? We've been doing it through the lockdowns. We continue to open new stores across India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. Our partnerships with Reliance Digital and the Chromas of the world have only become stronger. We are investing heavily in offline to online, models, etc. See, at the same time, there is no moving away from the fact that there is a lot more product discovery happening in the virtual world, right? For brands like ours, a lot of that discovery is still happening, honestly, outside e-commerce. So the first touch point is probably either a review site or a brand.com. And for 50% of the customers, they are still going to e-commerce only when they're reasonably sure on what they want to, buy. Maybe it might not be the brand, but they know that, hey, I probably want an i5 laptop. I want an SSD. I definitely want a 50 range because I want a slightly more immersive experience and so on. Yeah. So yeah, it's, as I just said, it's still not a unipolar world. It won't be, I think, in a long-term time. Points of discovery will continue to be multiple. Yeah.
Yeah, you make an, when you were talking, I was thinking, so there are a bunch of questions that came in even before the session happened. Right? One of the questions I thought was interesting said, how do you build customer trust when a customer can only see a product in a 2D screen? I think that kind of feeds into what you're saying as well, is that physically there are aspects of a product which you do want to kind of feel and see, which is why those exist. But can you almost have that experience kind of blend into the digital world as well? How much can you blend it in there? Prashant, I'd love for you to.
Yeah, so see, I think there are categories like fashion and probably consumer durables because of the nature of it, who have probably moved a bit more on that continuum towards giving a more holistic experience, towards giving people more immersive experiences, right? When it comes to understanding products, knowing products, and so on. Are we there yet? Probably no. It will probably still take a few more years to give something remotely closer to what you can call is the equivalent of an offline experience. And I'm sure by that time, offline would have evolved further. So they'll probably give a better experience than they do now, right? So, however, there are several categories like, home merchandise, general merchandise, grocery. I believe that there is a lot more to happen when it comes to shopper experiences. Forget giving a close to physical experience, they even give a good digital experience, right? Yeah. So it's a bit of a journey, yeah.
Suchita?
I think, I'll echo what Prashant says, and even if you look at any successful brand, locally or internationally, none of them have been able to make a dent without one or the other. It always seems to be a bit of a jugalbandi, right? You need one to feed off the other, and vice versa. And actually, when Prashant was talking, I was trying to rack my brain to think, is there any, large brand that's been built off of the back of only, direct to consumer or pure play marketplace? Really not. It seems like everyone has, everyone sort of found multiple different touch points in order, in order to drive some amount of impact. I also think everything's not necessarily always a zero-sum game, right? Online doesn't have to happen at the cost of offline or vice versa. And I think the smarter brands have now figured out ways to really use one to drive value to the other. So, for example, we were talking to a couple of brands who mentioned how, them being on Myntra, for example, actually helps in driving their in-store sales directly to their, to their brand store. So, and this is the one feedback that, even we give a lot of brands who are selling on LBB or whatever else, saying that maximize your channels of distribution, because you don't know where the customer will transact, whether that happens online, offline. Not all of it can be very easily determined. Fairly clearly. But I think that's where distribution will always be the ultimate moat, right? You need to be wherever the customer is.
While you're going to be wherever the customer is, and that's, I just want to pick it up from that point and actually ask Prashant something, is that because now the customer exists in so many different touch points rather than just physical stores, has it almost changed I'd say how do you put together an entire marketing team or an entire team focused on sales for any brand now? Would you say that's fundamentally shifted now for the future?
Has the team structuring changed? Probably.
Composition, maybe.
Yeah. No, I think what has definitely changed is the skill set which I now look for, right? So, see, 2 years back, we did not have a full-time e-commerce marketing manager, right? And we're probably late into the game, I would say, in getting a full-time, manager who looked at e-commerce marketing, with the lens of marketing versus, just driving sell-out and sell-throughs. So that has definitely changed in terms of composition. You have, I think, a lot of brands now have e-commerce experience teams. You have exclusive service teams for e-commerce. And, just to make the point that it is a 4P experience, right? It's not just a marketing experience alone, which you're looking at. You have whether on roles or not on roles, but I have full-time analytics people who are only looking at e-commerce data day in and day out, and therefore informing marketing plans. So in a lot of ways, I think the skill set which used to compose a sales team has definitely changed. And honestly, I believe it hasn't changed enough. It should probably have changed a lot more by now. See, essentially, there is digitization or, e-commerce more so actually has increased data density a lot more, right? Today, I have like hundreds of gigabytes of data on attributes like intent, which I never had access to earlier. And I still do not have a full-time, probably, machine learning model expert within the team. I still look at it as a shared service. Mm-hmm. And I, go to that team and say, hey, here's this data. Can you make some sense for this, of this for me, right? And probably those are the things which should have changed by now. We should have, I think, machine learning as a capability, understanding, ability to put all that data into a model and then inform my plans, whether it's segmentation or targeting or even positioning to that matter, right? Spends for sure. All that should have happened by now for a lot more brands than it has happened as yet.
Yeah. And so just taking from that, there are a large number of brands who are on LBB who have almost, this is the way in which they actually started selling to consumers, right? How they're kind of pushing out there. What have you learned from them as to how they're composing their teams? What almost the strategies they've learned from what are larger players and what they're actually using as almost like digital first players in that sense?
So I think what's interesting about a lot of, smaller brands is, constraint is a beautiful thing, right? When you're limited with money, when you don't have the most complex teams, when you don't have, all historical data to really make decisions. I think what's really interesting about a lot of the smaller brands is just their ability and their agility to experiment. Right. So, and experiment in a fairly organic format. So, for example, one really interesting tactic that we see a lot of smaller brands deploy now is this, use case of creating communities around their product. Interestingly enough, even Mama Earth, when they started out, had this community of moms that sort of fed back and gave them feedback about their product. So I think with a lot of smaller brands, the scale that they're at, their goal really is, one, how do I find product market fit? And the second is, once I found product market fit, how do I figure out channels to really scale my presence up, right? And again, just get my distribution flywheel going. And I think the interesting things that we've seen from like a marketing perspective, brands do obviously community is one. The second is we also see creators and influencers being a really interesting way for these products and brands to drive some amount of either organic search queries or some amount of follower growth or customer retention, etc., come through those channels. But the third and the most important thing, that I at least see small brands do is just create as concise a feedback loop as is possible with respect to their channel. So, for example, there are some brands, who we work with who will have a pure play Facebook plus Instagram strategy, right? There are others that will just go crazy on SEO and build a lot of volume through that in order to drive sales for them. We've seen other platforms like Inknut do a fairly good job of just crushing it as far as SEO is concerned. We'll see others, just really stick to like DPA and optimize the living daylights out of them. But I think the smarter brands that we see, they pick their channels and they bet on their channels fairly well. The second, again, like I said, really invest in community. And the third is have very tight feedback loops so they're able to experiment, fairly quickly. And honestly, we also had to do a combination of all of these three things before we ourselves, got to a certain scale. But yeah, with low budgets and historical data points, it's tough. But I think, laying down the right breadcrumbs to help you join the dots, I think that's really key, especially when you're a small brand.
I'm going to pick up from that one. I actually asked Prashant this question. Right? There was a question that came in saying that what are physical brands which aren't just like digital platforms, etc. If you can look at it in that sense, not purely digital brands, you look at physical product brands. How are you kind of reaching out to consumers differently now that you also have to have the leg of digital plus physical? Has that changed? And I'm adding in two questions there. There's another question kind of came in saying, has that also shifted the metrics we focus on, especially when you kind of reaching out to consumers?
See, fundamentally, large brands, honestly, work a bit differently. We are a bit more like elephants, right? We are not as nimble as the brands Suchita talked about. And there's a reason for that. See, for us, till we do things at scale, nothing moves, right? We do not get incremental benefits. For a brand like HP, just think of this. Anybody who's coming into the market to buy a notebook today probably has me already in consideration, right? I mean, there are all of three and a half brands in this, market, fortunately for us, yeah. And therefore, I'm already in consideration. And therefore, unless I drive clear preference with people who really care about me, I would not move the needle. And therefore, for me, more than reach, it's one, the quality of reach, and second, the quality of that interaction, which, and again, happening at scale, which matters a lot more, right? So now coming back to your question, has my, the way I reach, has that changed, or my media mix, has that changed significantly? I'll probably say no when it comes to top of funnel. However, at the middle and the bottom of the funnel, and we are in a slightly different situation, right? Today, we have very high intent for our category. So there are people coming in because of learn from home as a need or work from home as a need. And they just want a device, ASAP. And therefore, that has led to, some shift in dollars from, say, more top of funnel reach-led dollars to middle and bottom of funnel preference driving dollars. Yeah. But otherwise, honestly, no. I mean, the way I reach probably still hasn't changed a lot. My media mix at top of funnel hasn't really changed. Yeah.
Just as a follow-up to that, you have worked across different sectors through your career. Are you seeing certain sectors where that has changed, or where if you had to kind of look at it in that sense?
Oh, I'm sure. So I know that print advertising, for example, has gone down, right? So I'm sure there are people who've moved away from print because it was a media which delivered a lot of impact for you. You don't want to do that in today's situation, right? Therefore, there are definitely brands which have moved print dollars away. Therefore, there are brands which are doing launches very differently, right? So there are lots of categories which have a far higher refresh cycle than ours. For example, mobile phones, right? The refresh cycle is almost 4 to 6 months. And therefore, I see a lot of launches now happening exclusively, without any kind of ATL media. I see a lot of launches happening only on e-commerce, right? And it is giving them that initial flywheel. So yeah, for a lot of categories, it does seem to be working. Yeah.
Suchita, there's a follow-up question to your ensemble approach to consumption point, which is saying, how does it impact loyalty versus tendency to explore new brands and products in the same category?
So I think the categories that we're in, right, and obviously we work with large brands, we work with small brands as well. I think the categories that we're in, the good thing is because we're a marketplace and a platform, we are happy one way or the other, right? Because the customer is still coming back to us, irrespective of whether they're buying from the same brand or not. But I do think, in categories such as fashion, home and kitchen, beauty, personal care, and even snacks and beverages, I think marketers and brand owners should optimize for the fact that customers will not be loyal because such is the nature of the category that they're in and the product that they have, right? So instead of constantly chasing, things like retention and looking at your repeat cohorts, I think what would be interesting for brands to look at is, is there a way in which I can create some amount of like cross category movement? And we see a lot of brands on LBB do that, right, where even if they are within beauty and personal care as a space, they'll pick up something within hair care, within skincare, they'll add a mix of cosmetics. So it goes back to the earlier point of, I think the great thing about brands today is that they are realizing that the customer has frankly no need to be loyal. I'll be loyal to a notebook, right? I'll be loyal to a device because my hope is that I get, at least 1 years of wear out of it. But I don't really need to be loyal to a t-shirt brand that I bought from yesterday, right? Because again, no one really wants to own the same thing twice. And I actually think that, in my opinion, is also puts the impetus on brands to really think through everything from what their positioning is. I don't. It's really interesting because we have this merchant community and they keep giving us inputs and feedback and also asking us questions. And the single biggest question that we get asked is how do we think through our positioning? And I think it's really interesting that a lot of brands have finally, especially up and coming brands, have finally started thinking through what really makes me different, right? Is it the form? Is it same thing, the channel of acquisition? Is it the way that I re-engage, with my users? And what are the large metrics that really matter to me? So I think the thing with the business is you need to, everything comes down to your margin structure. And I'm sort of like jumping in between different points because everything actually comes from your margin structure. And there are certain types of categories and there are certain types of lines, because of their margin structure, they can frankly afford to not have the world's most loyal customer, right? A great example being, for instance, something like Casper, the mattress company, and the multiple types of Caspers that have come up in India. Now, I don't really need, customers don't need to, ideally should not need to buy a mattress multiple, different times. But again, if you are building Casper or if, you're building a Casper Me Too in India, a lot of what you want to think through is, does my margin structure allow me some amount of breathing space as far as when that next acquisition or that next purchase needs to happen? And does my margin structure give me the ability to also potentially maybe launch, categories that are slightly more adjacent to the one that I want to be core in? We see Glossier do this really well in the US as well, right? Where sure, their core is makeup, and skincare historically have always been, great repeat categories. But in the US has also seen this crazy explosion of makeup, skincare, and hair care brands. And I think what's really interesting is, now they've sort of gone into merchandise. So now they're trying to get a little bit more of your wallet share by saying, hey, buy my makeup bag as well, right? So I think there are all of these really unique ways in which brands themselves have realized that, no customer needs to be loyal to you. And that's why what I love about the slightly more newer models coming out within e-commerce, LBB being one of them, not to toot down on, but LBB being one of them, is that, e-com platforms themselves have realized that content needs to somehow come within the grander scheme of things, because I can't get a customer to buy every time they open my app or open my web, but can I get them to linger a little, right? Can I get them to window shop and maybe use subsequent, window shopping sessions to drive a purchase or to drive an order or a transaction? So that's the way I'd address that, where you need to sort of operate knowing that loyal nahi honge, it doesn't matter. But what you should make sure is that the customer doesn't fall out of your ecosystem. And you're keeping the customer engaged through, whether it's affiliate categories or just, creating a content network, a community, whatever, to keep them coming back to you.
Yeah, I'm just going to pick up from this one and actually ask Prashant this question, right? Is that, and this kind of came in from two people simultaneously while Suchita was talking, is that when you're looking at this form of functioning and loyalty, I know that HP has a strong focus on on almost like being a company for creators, right? That's something you really pushed out there in terms of everything that you put out. How does that play out, especially from you building community, right? I think that's an interesting thing to kind of tap into, saying how has that focus really helped build a community of people focused on creation, and in that sense also, that build in loyalty in a time like now.
Yeah. No, so yeah, Varun, see, not only creators, actually, Gen Z overall, right, is a big focus cohort for us. And one of the big insights about this cohort is that they are exhausted by ads. Okay. They just don't want to see advertising. I mean, they are the cohort which has the highest number of ad blockers installed. They probably, what they favor, however, is that they favor a lot of authentic content, right? And they want to be in places where they are understood by like-minded individuals, right? And I believe that is what, kind of drives this need of communities and, actually nuanced, smaller communities, right? See, for us, therefore, creating communities, or rather enabling communities for creators and other, say, smaller cohorts within Gen Z continues to be a priority, whether it's gaming or it is even learners, right? So I think that will continue to be a priority. I think one of the challenges here is how to really create this bridge between content to commerce, right? Now, digitization enables me to do this to a certain extent, because I know who are the people who engage with me on my content. I also know who are the people who then register on my device. I know who are the people who consume my, devices or device through some telemetry data, etc. However, if you look at any content-led initiative on commerce platforms, we honestly do not have probably great examples to talk about, right? Great successes. So, and I think some very bold efforts have been made by all e-commerce majors, but we are yet to see like a really, a ball hit out of the park. Till then, I think the challenge for brands, and probably I'll ask Suchita to reflect on this a bit, is how does one bridge this, gap between content to commerce? There's this, thing which we talked about, right? Loyalty, and does more content consumption from a brand like HP, does it make you more loyal to an HP notebook? I mean, I'm yet to see evidence, although like I'm a firm believer in doing that, but the evidence is yet to kind of come through. Yeah. Suchita.
No, I think what you said is super interesting, and when you look at models coming out, especially from the West and some in China, a lot of what you see happening is this uncoupling of. And I know there's a lot of hype, given that we were a part of that hype of, oh, content is going to drive commerce, and let's all run around in circles. Google's tried that with Google Shopping, Instagram tried that with Shop. Very few, even at that scale, have been able to drive a dent, right? And I think my sort of TLDR of all of this is we need to put that content to commerce conversation, to a rest, because again, going back to the point that I'd made earlier, which is I think the beauty of so many ecosystems existing, whether it's discovery ecosystems or commerce ecosystems, it is that shopping is now becoming a journey. It's not purely based on needs, right? It's based on desires.
Yes.
And I think the great role that content plays is in creation of that desire. Now, any marketer, us included. So, for example, we've got 2.5 million followers on Instagram. We have a monthly reach of close to 60 million. How many orders does Instagram drive for us? Not very many, I can say. But what I can tell you is that the metrics that we see that reflect on is, for example, we've seen a surge in organic branded search terms for LBB, right? We'll see, and even though it happens at a basis point level, we'll see an improvement in conversion over a period of time, right? We'll, for example, see, category searches being prefixed or suffixed with LBB, right? So people searching for bamboo furniture, LBB, or awesome notebook, LBB, whatever. And I think that's really where the content engine should start kicking in. Right now, I'm using us as an example, but keeping LBB aside, I think the other example that I'll add to the mix, for instance, is I absolutely love what Nykaa has done with their community, and you have to give credit where it's due, where they've done an absolutely stupendous job of looking at content as an ecosystem to drive awesome top of the funnel, and then using that to lower your customer acquisition costs. So, for example, even for us, right, like we work with large brands who don't, Lego, for instance, is one of our largest advertisers. They don't necessarily sell Lego on LBB, but for them, for instance, through the campaign that they did with us, they saw an increase in market share by, close to about 4%. Now, I'm not saying LBB drove everything for them. They obviously had multiple other channels that they were, working with or working on. But I think the smarter marketers, the smarter platforms, and the smarter even e-com companies, what we see them doing is really using content as a way to lower your CAC, to grow your organic traffic, and to also drive some amount of repeats. And that's a funnel that at least we follow on LBB, right? So it's nuanced, but I think, given that, I mean, I get asked this question all the time, right? Like, when will content to commerce happen? And I think the point that, we've said over and over again is, I don't think the journey is that simple, but it's great to look at it in two different pieces and really look at content as a way to, cheapen and expand your top of funnel. To give you another example, MyGlam's acquisition of PopXO, right? Again, great example of how a pure play commerce product selling platform used content and distribution on social media to really drive down their customer acquisition costs. So you see all kinds of interesting plays coming up. Airbnb's done a great job, on their merchant side by building their community up, doing a lot of interesting content on that front. I see fintech platforms like, Grow and Zerodha and Smallcase, all of these guys crush it with their content. Now, I'm sure even those guys aren't really thinking of, is article se mujhe kitne app downloads mile. But I think the thesis is that by, again, same thing, just being in as many distribution channels as is possible, you're getting into the customer's consideration set. And the aim over a period of time is that by just driving through a customer's consideration set at the right place at the right time, you should be able to see an impact on your conversion.
Absolutely. I think, and just reflecting on something which we saw happen very recently with printers. So, we started something called the Print Learn Center last year around October, November. And idea honestly at that time was that we saw younger kids not meeting learning outcomes, right? Because 3 to 7-year-olds were just not able to continue their education. They couldn't follow the teacher from behind a virtual screen, right? Because a lot of their learning happens actually through all 4, 5 senses and not visually, not audio visually alone, right? And we are actually seeing customer interest come back in a category like printers, where again we kind of, a lot of people write off that category every 5 years, right? And say that, hey, like what's the role of printers now? And this is a melting ice cube, is what some analysts said in the US. And the category is doing phenomenally well. Right?
I just bought one about a few months ago, so I totally agree.
Thank you so much for that. And there are people who are, and that's true. There are people coming back and saying, hey, one thing which this, staying at home has kind of made me realize is that I actually want time away from the screen. I want it with something real, tangible in my hands. And mothers, or say rather, teachers and parents come back and tell us that the kind of engagement which they see kids have with a physical piece of paper, right, or an exercise which they are doing physically is way more than otherwise, right? So, probably a big role which content has, not only in driving traffic and therefore attribution to sales, but I think, as Suchita said, in desirability, in really even discovery of use cases.
I don't mean to hijack the conversation, Varun, from you, but given that Prashant and I are enjoying jamming on this topic.
I'm very happy with this. Both of you are making my job easier. So I'm totally listening right now.
I want to actually add one example to what Prashant said, right? It was interesting. I subscribed to this newsletter called, it's run by this thing called Jacuzzi Club. Super interesting. I should check it out for like direct to consumer brands coming out the US. And there's this brand that I found on it. It's called Square. It's basically a dishwasher. Like, I'm not even joking. That thing that you use to wash dishes, that's what Square does. And it's a D2C startup based out of the US. And then I went onto their website saying, how random is this, right? And what was fascinating was on their website, they had this whole section saying, as seen on The Strategist, as seen on NY Mag, as seen on New York Times, etc., etc., etc. And the one observation that I had was, I think the US is a hotbed for D2Cs because their content infrastructure is so well laid out. It takes one recommendation on The Strategist or Wirecutter or even Houdinki to crush it with respect to sales for the BMWs to the whoever else is of the world. So just another quick example there.
So when I look at this, also what is interesting, the word of content, when you talk about it, you're also talking about the creator economy, talk about influencers, right? Is that something you attribute a lot more towards sale? Because that did come up earlier. Would you say that part has actually become almost like you now have multiple media channels which you can use to kind of also show use case, educate if required, but yet also push for sale? Is that becoming, because that's something which has been a trend that's been very obvious, that you're seeing more and more content for brands being created by creators and then pushing for sale through that. Has that trend kind of now scaled up to the point where that's actually almost like first option in many cases, rather than building it in the brands, let's say channels themselves?
Yeah, I would say that for us, it is still not meaningfully impactful. I still look at it as a channel where I would want to drive discovery of USPs. And I would just want to tell the product story more than anything else, right? Suchita.
+1, man. We worked with so many influencers and we worked with so many influencers for so many brands. And what I can tell you is you still end up having to complement their distribution with your own distribution in order to drive any result. But I think the thing that we've seen is, content creators are a great way to create assets that actually resonate with a millennial or a Gen Z customer. So, for example, showing a dress on a model against a white background is really not going to get you the kind of sales that you want, right? But the second you show it on an influencer, for example, we see higher CTRs on content like that. So a lot of what we've done internally is we sort of re-strategize our influencer strategy and our creator strategy to use them more as ways to actually create content, which we then, put muscle and distribution into, and use that to get, better CTRs, better CACs, and higher conversion. So +1 on what Prashant just said.
I'm just going to drop a question that came in the chat into this. I thought it'd be interesting to plug in. Is that one of the reasons why I use creators also show how it's physically, like you just said, to use the product and show that in real case against a white rather than a white background. So do you see AR for product demos being a big thing in the future, especially now because that's become a focus area? So someone dropped that in the chat. I thought that would be an interesting thing to pick up.
Yeah, so see, we've used it for a lot of enterprise, say demos. So for example, when we call in 30, 40 CIOs virtually, we actually send VR headsets and we, give them a 3D feel of the product, of actually the entire use case and so on. And great experiences can be curated. I haven't been able to do it at scale, right? And purely because I don't see, there's just so much friction, right? Even if everybody has a wearable which can give you a 3D experience, can I get all of them to wear the 3D wearable and then, okay, take my experience? Yeah, that hasn't happened. I don't know if that will, yeah.
Have you seen that happen, Suchita?
Nope.
Because we've been talking about the AR and the VR space for a long time now. It's been supposedly coming, but it still hasn't become a core part of it. Whereas what I'm seeing in terms of just commerce and how it shifted with I was recently watching this video. I think most people have seen of how in China you have people actually training to be online sellers per se, and that entire, I mean, it's almost like industry training people to become online sellers in that sense. So you're seeing stuff like that happen. And I'm connecting that to a question that came in the chat saying, if you're a small business now, or if you're a business now planning to open a physical retail store in the near future, what do you need to keep in mind as to what has changed in the demands of a physical store compared to what it was, let's say, even pre-pandemic, when obviously e-com was still slightly at a lower end than physical?
Yeah, maybe I'll go first. So, see, sourcing traffic from online, and I talked a bit about omnichannel earlier, right? So that has become like a must do for all physical stores. So you can't just rely on walk-ins anymore, right? And therefore you need to be talking to customers or shoppers who are displaying intent in the virtual world, and tell them, hey, why don't you come down to my store and take a look, or why don't you just like buy online and I deliver, right? So that's one. See, for everything else, and every time we talk to partners, they just tell us that a lot of things they just have to do even better than what they had to do earlier. So look at what has happened, right? And by design, e-commerce basically lets the entire assortment of whatever products there is. Okay, let's stay with notebooks, right? So the entire notebook assortment today is available across 20,000 pin codes, okay, in the country. Now, what does that mean for a store in Bareilly, right? So my store in Bareilly now has to be even better at portfolio management, even better at stock forecasting, even better at managing every customer experience and so on, because there is just so much sheer choice to that shopper, and at the drop of a hat she would say that, oh no, I'm going to just buy it online, right? So that she won't compromise anymore, right? And therefore everything which they did, they just have to do better. And of course they have to then have a virtual presence, source shoppers from online. Yeah.
Have you seen that shift around with the brands on LBB as well? This perspective of how do we look at physical versus...
I think the brands that sell on LBB, I don't think any of them are interested in physical at all. In fact, a lot of the opposite of that is happening, right? I think people have just generally become, especially small brands, for whom opening a physical store is, a lot of blood, capital, sweat and tears, and a lot of it is also non-refundable, right? And again, as like the retail landscape in India has shown, there are not enough hotbeds that have been created for retail to actually excel. I mean, you look at the infrastructure of a city like Delhi even, but I think with a lot of small brands, it's actually become the opposite, because a lot of small brands have realized that they can, really use on, and also now there's many more channels, right? For example, we launched commerce on our platform only in 2019. And back when we launched, there was the usual suspects, and maybe to some extent Nykaa and Purple, right? Today, everyone, whether it's a GPay or a PhonePe or a Paytm, all of them are launching these mini apps, within their applications as well. So, for example, we recently launched a tool called MasterShop by LBB, plugging it in. But you can use MasterShop to actually get your catalog online, and then the same infra is used to help you set up a store on GPay, PhonePe, Paytm, mini apps, etc. So, plugin aside, I think a lot of what we've learned is brands have realized that they actually have more, they can open more stores in the digital world, which is what retail comes down to, even in the offline world, right? What matters is your distribution. Your one store is not going to, really change an outcome for you. So, what we've seen a lot of small brands do is, use digital as a way to actually open multiple different storefronts. And we've seen brands become, want to use a lot of their working capital in achieving that outcome versus, putting all of that money into one store in the corner of some random market, and not necessarily knowing what the outcome of that spend will be.
Prashant, there's actually, I'm going to again put two questions together, which have kind of come in and ask us that. What are the elements you consider when you're building a narrative, especially from a brand storytelling perspective? And how, in that, there's also a question about how do you see virtual events or live events playing a part in that? So I'm just going to put those together and ask you.
Sorry, come again on the first one.
What are the elements you consider when you're building the narrative for almost like brand storytelling, product storytelling in that sense? What are the key elements you focus on?
So, slightly broad question. Let me, I'm just thinking, should I probably best answer it through an example? So, see, for us, actually, the first thing which I always want to start off is, the cliched, who's my customer? But then kind of narrow it down to say that, can I narrow scope further, right? And because that is where, in my experience, the most beautiful brand narratives have come out of, right? So if you really, really pinpoint to say that, okay, let's talk about creators, right? So we started thinking about, our brand narrative for creators, and then we said, hey, this is just too big a field, right? There are just too many creators, and so let me decide, okay, can I make Varun Duggirala fall in love with me, right? So, okay, not as narrow as that, but so we said, okay, let's probably, let go of freelancers, and let's maybe only think of people who have a side hustle today, right? But they are kind of thinking of making it their main game, right? And therefore I said that, okay, this cohort of people who are in this state of mind and in this context, they are the people I want to talk to, right? And now beautiful narratives can come out from there, right? Because you can say that, hey, I know that that this is what you're trying to do in life. And I can be your ally in, probably helping you figure how to monetize, how to get mentorship, how to increase reach, and so on, right? So for me, therefore, I think the first bit on building a brand narrative is to really narrow scope to a TG who you think will really does already really care about your category, but can also be made to care about your brand through something which you can do for her, right? So yeah, I don't know if that answers it well. Yeah.
It does. And I'll also love to get your POV on live events, and where do they kind of play into? Are you seeing that as something for the future, especially because around products like yours, live launches, brands, everything was a seriously large part of it. But since things have gone virtual, are you seeing that alter, like this is going to stay that way, or do you see that kind of coming back?
See, again, it's one of those things where you have to be a bit more customer centric, right? See, events used to be a big thing in the like the real world, right? Because I mean, you got covered in Times of India the next day, or you got covered in the Bombay Times, right?
Yeah.
And then the third day, Dainik Bhaskar will pick you, and the fourth day, you know, Tanti will pick you and put you out there in Chennai and Coimbatore and so on. Now that's happening, right? So does it therefore necessarily now translate into an event in the virtual world? I believe no, right? However, do you need to create news about your brand? Do you need to create, a PR around your brand? I think that continues to be important, right? For live events per se, for me, unless there is something like really great for the customer in terms of content or for a takeaway. For example, if I was launching the next AirPods, I'll probably definitely do a live event. Yeah. Right? Because I know there are these virtual queues of people who are looking out for those. Yeah. But if I was adding like another 21-inch monitor to my portfolio, I'll probably not. Yeah.
Fair enough. There was one interesting question, and I thought that's a good one to kind of talk about. Is that do you also see the fact that because now even though you're targeting online, how different is it when you target someone from like a tier 1 city to a tier 3 city, especially looking at commerce from a digital only lens?
No difference, honestly. See, geography for me as a cut never mattered. So for me, it's the customer persona. I honestly don't care if you are in Mumbai or if you are in Saharanpur. If, for example, let me take, so Print Learn Center is something which, we've been working on for a bit now. And for example, if there's a striving parent or there's an incubator parent, I won't go into the details of this, but wherever you are, that's the person who matters to me, right? So if you're striving to get your child to meet learning outcomes, then I have something to say to you and I have a certain content to serve. If you are an incubator or an evolved parent, irrespective of where you are, there's a certain content to serve. Yeah.
I think I'd address it the same way, where I think now it's so interesting how geographical parameters have become almost secondary to the way you look at customers. I think the only thing that matters in that case, especially if your route is e-commerce, is customer experience. Which again has obviously become much more robust because logistics in our country has become much more robust. Warehousing in our country has become much more robust than it was, perhaps 5 years ago. So I think the only real hindrance is, basics like how long will it take order to reach? Will it reach the person in the absolute, perfect shape, size, condition as they have anticipated? I think those are really the concerns that come up when you think of the e-com journey for a customer. But apart from that, users are everywhere, man. Even for a platform like us, we've seen shoppers from over 200 cities and towns shop using LBB, which I found absolutely incredible, given, we started out as a city focus, as like a local discovery platform, but we've been able to tap into customers, everywhere. You just have to be really particular about what the experience is going to be.
There's a question that came in before the session, which I think is intriguing. So I'd love to hear both of your point of views on it, saying, are we ever going to look at e-commerce beyond convenience, because it's also making us lazy and lethargic? I'd love to get your views on this question.
This is so interesting. So a couple of years back, there was this brand who walked in. I was with Flipkart, right? And he asked me that, hey, will people ever look at e-commerce beyond value? Right? And I said, come on, people will look at it for convenience. So I don't know, it's not bad, right? Let them look at it for convenience. But yeah, it is convenient, right? And it offers a lot more, honestly, right? I think for categories like fashion, the kind of assortment today you can make available to anybody and everybody across the country, it would never have been possible. So I, for example, grew up in Agra, right? And there were probably all of 3 stores which had like a decent assortment, right? And often I would be wearing what my cousins from Delhi would come back and say, "Hey, dude, this looks like fashion from last year," because the shop in Agra wouldn't just sell fast enough, right? And I would be wearing like the N-2, N-3 fashion, right? And it's completely changed. So there's a lot more, beyond convenience and value, I think, which e-commerce is already offering.
Yeah, I think, convenience has become table stakes now. You have to offer that if you want to play in the general game of e-commerce, and we've seen that even with us, right? And I actually think what makes e-commerce fun now is that convenience is table stakes. And that, fortunately, you don't have to take the burden of convenience onto you, because there's enough of an infrastructure that's created that you can offload that convenience on. So it's not like we have our own logistics systems. We are also piggybacking off of the delivery express, these ship rockets of the world, right? So I actually think what makes e-com fun as a entrepreneur, and even as a consumer to a large extent, is that there are so many new layers that you can build into the shopping experience. To the point that Prashant made earlier. In fact, one of our biggest investments is machine learning and just data analytics, right? And one of the big features that we sort of over-invested on was personalization on our product, which again, for a data nerd not like me, but my co-founder and other folks in our team, it's such a more interesting way to look at layers that you can create within the commerce journey, right? We've got a couple of fun announcements coming up that I can't talk about just yet, but I actually think what makes ecom fun now is that the heavy lifting was done by folks like Prashant at Flipkart. So the rest of us can actually have fun with e-commerce and really unlock something special with e-commerce.
No, absolutely. I think there's customization as a value add. I think you will see so much more of it happening now. I mean, honestly, I lived through a time in Flipkart when probably reco engines were not at its best, right? I used to get a lot of flack from my friends, right? That why is your reco engine so and it's true across. I mean, even reco engines even now probably are not at their best. But then as data density increases, you will see, I love the Netflix reco engine, for example. And I'm sure we are going to be able to replicate it across e-commerce in the country, right? And you will see the value there, right?
So to round everything off that we've spoken of for the last 1 hour, if I was someone who is in college studying to work in this world which is in front of me after I graduate, what are the pieces that I need to keep in mind, especially in terms of where I'm upskilling myself, where I'm kind of building almost areas that I have certain levels of expertise in, if I want to kind of work in it and kind of grow? Prashant, let's start with you.
See, if you're specifically looking to make a career in sales and marketing, probably I can come in on that. And I think I can give a much more rounded answer. For me, I think more than ever, it's important to have 4P understanding. So, hone your skills not only on digital marketing, but please understand pricing, understand portfolio management. The first chance you get your hands dirty with, trying to manage the smallest of possible, but profit and loss statement, try to, learn sales. So, I mean, that's a skill which will never go out of favor, right? So all those core business management skills, I think I firmly believe all of them will, kind of make you a better sales and marketing professional, right? Over and above that, in this new time, you've got to learn. I see. Basically, there are 2 things which e-commerce has kind of now added, right? There is the ability to digitize intent, right? And therefore, you must learn how to capture intent. There are existing tools like SEO, SEM, programmatic, social, e-com search, display, etc., which you must come in an understanding of. But more importantly, I think you also need to come in with a basic understanding of capturing customer context, right? And that is again something which has been probably digitized by e-commerce to a large extent and will continue happening over time. But come in with kind of this understanding. The other thing which probably gets underplayed a bit in this entire thing of saying that, oh, we need to know e-commerce and so on, is this fracture point where your category meets e-commerce. And we've talked a lot about this today, right? How every category is different. So you've got to come in with a deep understanding of your own category, right? If you sell lamps, then you need to understand how people buy lamps. If you sell, notebooks, you need to understand how people buy notebooks. And it's only then when, all these skills kind of contextualize. Yeah. So I think a deep category understanding of what you are really dealing in is probably kind of continues to stay extremely essential. Yeah.
I'll add to that. I think, the three roles that at least we're fairly bullish on. So I think the one one undercurrent is everyone needs to learn how to be a master of none, right? You need to, you need a little bit of your, the left side of your brain, a little bit of your right, but you need to have the agility to operate one or the other as and when needed, because the thing with the world of, e-commerce is context changes very quickly. And you need to have the agility to adapt to changing context. But if I had to specifically give you roles, I think one is visual merchandising. I think will be key, because gone are the times when only vastness of selection is a differentiator, and you actually see a lot of platforms, from the likes of the Amazons and Flipkarts of the world to other e-com platforms that are category focused, really invest deeply in their visual merchandising, because what folks have realized is that selection is a mode. The game's already been won, right? Amazon and Flipkart have won it. So what are you going to do with the on-platform experience, which will really be a differentiator as far as your customers are concerned? So I actually am very bullish on visual merchandising as as an area of expertise, really making a comeback. And visual merchandising shouldn't only be based on data or instinct. I actually think, up and coming consumer trends could be a really interesting layer to add into the way people think of their VM. I think the second role that I made a note of is, usually marketing teams are sort of split into our brand ke bande ho or our performance ke bande ho, right? And both of them sort of sit in their own little, adjacent bubbles. I think the sort of blending of those two worlds has to start happening. And actually what's interesting is even within our teams, we're, seeing our brand marketers become very data oriented, almost giving our performance marketing guys and girls a run for their money, and vice versa, right? You've seen performance marketers also become very particular about, does this align with our brand message? So you're saying 80% off, but is that what our value proposition is? And will this lead to a, crappy customer coming in and, screwing up our LTV 6 months later? So I think marketing in general has become fairly much more center than it was before. And I think finally, data and analytics will continue to play a significant role, and it kind of ties in with the first point that I'd made, where every e-com content, any platform has realized that vastness is not the answer for customers. Personalization, contextualization, all of these things will play key roles in even helping companies like us or any other survive and beat Amazon and the Flipkarts of the world in the categories that we play in.
Thank you so much, Varun. I think this has been fabulous. Also, I have to thank every single person who logged in, because the number of questions I've had to juggle between in the Q&A box in the chat and all the stuff that came in, and try to cram as much of that into asking, getting that from both of you has been fabulous as well. Thank you so much for joining us on upGrad and LBB's Future Forward sessions. If you guys enjoyed this, please share it with whoever you think will also get great takeaways from this. It's in the chat. Tag LBB for business. Tag upGrad _edu. If you want to tag me, you can tag me. I'm always happy when people do that. But thanks a ton for joining in, and stay tuned for future sessions that are coming up with more details dropping soon. But thanks, Prashant. Thanks, Suchita. This has been fabulous.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.